Hello and welcome to Vinyl Safari. My name is Sean Patterson. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Brett Smith-Daniels. Brett is a British-Canadian guitarist, singer-songwriter, and producer currently based in Vancouver Island, British Columbia. I first met Brett during the 2018 Kingston Blues Festival, where he was performing 2 consecutive nights at the Toucan, and I was immediately blown away by his performance. He's a seriously skilled guitarist with a gritty and memorable vocal style, and his onstage chops are rare to come by. I had the pleasure of striking up conversation and eventually joining him to jam on a handful of tunes on his second night at the pub, and we've stayed in touch ever since. As of the release of this podcast, Brett has put out a brand new single entitled Teenagers from Mars and has a full album's worth of material on the way for 2021. I highly recommend you check out his music, and if you get the chance to see him perform live in the future, definitely take it. We discuss his life as a musician between 2 countries, how he's adjusted to life in 2020 and beyond, the resurgence of the electric guitar, his writing processes, and much more. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please remember to subscribe to Oakridge Ave on YouTube, follow Vinyl Safari on your preferred podcatcher, and share the podcast wherever you can. Thanks for listening, and now I bring you Mr. Brett Smith-Daniels. All right. Hey, Brett, thank you for joining Vinyl Safari.
Thanks very much for having me.
So I know you've probably answered this question a lot already, but how have things sort of been for you going through this pandemic as a musician?
Bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, that seems to be the theme for sure.
Yeah, no, it's although it has had its upsides because I've built a little. I'm sat in my spare room closet at the moment, which is really glamorous. But I built a little home studio, which is it's useful because I'm doing sessions from home now and teaching from home, so it's something.
Yeah,
but doesn't beat gigs yet, though.
Yeah, definitely not. Well, I'm glad you've at least been able to do that, though. That's it's nice to at least be able to keep making music and keep contributing in some way. It's I know the feeling though, like nothing really is a replacement for gigging.
No.
And I mean, we've all done the live stream stuff. For what it is, I'm quite happy with that, like live streaming as an option. I'm glad that exists, but you can only ever get like 60 or 70% of the way there, even with the best ones. And I've seen some pretty cool live streams, and some of the better ones, they're quite enjoyable. But man, we played 1 gig with people there in person. We were behind this big plexiglass bubble, and they all had their masks on. There were 24 people in the room, and just feeling the bass through the floor and like the amps moving some air made all the difference in the world. It went by in no time. We played for an hour, and it felt like a blink of an eye.
Yeah, I miss that feeling. I've done some kind of like stripped back solo acoustic social distance stuff here in BC, but I haven't done anything with drums since March 2020, which is like nearly a year ago, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's a long time, man. It's rough. Well, anyway, I don't want to go too dark right off the bat. I was curious, just so that listeners can get a sense of who you are and your career. Would you mind just going through like basically how you came to Canada, what your career in music has been so far, when you started, and stuff like that?
Yeah, of course. Bit of a long, boring story, but my mum's Canadian. My dad is English. I was born in the UK in a place called Poole in Dorset. And I moved to Canada first when I was 7 or 8 years old. We had a family situation out here with my mum's dad, and ended up staying for 7 or 8 years. So I did some schooling out here in BC. And then my dad got a job offer back in the UK. Fairly soon afterwards, we moved back. And that's when things, in that last few years here and the first few years in the UK, again, after I moved back there, is kind of when things started to open up. So my first pro kind of setting gig was Massey Hall in Toronto back in 2010. Yeah.
My first show I ever saw was at Massey Hall, and I was blown away.
I love the venue. I really, really want to go back there someday, but fingers crossed if gigs are ever allowed again, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, so I did that when I was 14, so that's 11 years ago nearly, because I'm bordering 25, so it's starting to make me feel a little old. But and then
It's not so bad.
Yeah, it's not so bad. About a year later, I did kind of got this band together. It's a similar kind of band to the one that I'd done Mass Evil with, and had this crazy idea that we were going to go on Dragon's Den and pitch ourselves as business. And I came up with this harebrained scheme to start an independent record label, which didn't exist. It was just a theoretical, hypothetical thing that we were going to pitch to the Dragons and see if they bit. So they did, which was great because it was nice kudos. But as is often the way, you get 5 people offering to put 20 grand into you each on TV, and then you get backstage and you're signing all these kind of non-disclosures for a 5-year period. I can talk about it now because that's past, but and then the due diligence starts and things start to look a little different than they do on screen. So we didn't end up taking that, which I think ultimately was the right choice. So I got back to the UK when I was 16 and washed dishes for a while because you need some grounding after that. And then fairly quickly got a job in a Johnny Cash tribute band to the sort of south of the UK with that. And then after that, I started a band called the Villanovas. And that was kind of where things started to pick up again a bit for me. I was sort of touring. We did some stuff over here in Canada, and we went to Mexico as well. And we headlined a couple of sort of bigger events there, which was nice. And in between all of that, we moved to London, which was really a formative experience for me. And I went to the BIM, it's British Irish Blonde Music Institute up there. And it was good. I was mentored by a guy called Femi Tanowo, sort of specifically while I was there. And he's just an amazing jazz guitar player. He played for Amy Winehouse back in the day and was their musical director. So that was a huge influence on me. And then, being 18, 19 at the time and not really knowing my stuff, I was running into all sorts of musicians that had these kind of legendary pasts that I had no idea who they were. So I started working in this pub called the Cabin Free House, and very frequently you'd see people like Mickey Moody from Whitesnake and Mick Avery from the Kinks, sort of frequenting that particular pub. And I used to serve all those sort of guys quite a lot, not realizing who they were. So that was interesting. And I would get calls to fill in for guitar players and not realize that, so-and-so that I was filling in for was Robbie McIntosh and was off on tour with John Mayer or,
That's insane.
It's kind of I look back on it sort of 6 years later or whatever and think, probably should have made a bit of a better opportunity of that, but there you go. But then I guess it's better to be kind of natural with all that, really, rather than sucking up to people too much.
Yeah, there's an extreme in the other direction that is probably not the best to press on too much.
No, for sure.
Well, that's amazing. So I knew, I should go back. You and I met in Kingston 2 years ago, give or take.
Roughly, yeah, give or take.
So it was the Kingston Blues Fest, and you were playing at the Toucan, which happens to be my favorite pub. And
I love that place. It's great.
it was like home base for my band. My first few gigs with Oakridge Avenue was there, and we've done so many gigs there since. It really is like a second home. And we were in a weird sort of moment in the band where we were having some cool opportunities come up and not entirely sure if all 4 of us were fully committed and stuff. And Nathan, our singer at the time, he was given a really good job opportunity, so we were just sort of juggling with how we were going to move forward. And you were playing at the Toucan 2 nights in a row for the Blues Fest. And I got the text from Harrison, my drummer, who also works down there and was bouncing for the night. And he was like, "You have to come down and hear this crazy guitarist." He just like opened up with Fire by Jimi Hendrix and blew the roof off of this place. It's so loud. And I was like, okay, well, say no more. So I went down and I was like, wow, this guy freaking shreds. And it was great. You were just playing with a trio. And I was like, at that point, I was so deep into, you know, rediscovering or discovering for the first time these amazing blues and rock trios from anywhere from the late 60s through to the 90s that had either passed me by or that I hadn't given nearly enough time to. And I was super into that kind of music. It was so perfect that I went down there, was super impressed with your playing. And
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we chatted afterwards for a little while. I was probably fawning over your gear or something like that. And you were playing the next night, and you just said, "Why don't you come up and play a couple songs?" I was like, "Yes, fuck yes, let's do it." And I actually had like literally just bought this guitar the day.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a very fond memory for me, and that was our meeting there. And I remember at the time, I think you were just about to, or maybe had just released an EP. I think you were close to releasing it at the time.
Yeah. No,
Yeah. So how did things go? Right. How did things go sort of after that? Because we connected on Facebook and stuff, but
yeah,
it's been a little while since we've spoken.
Yeah, no, it's I will just stop and say I thought you were fantastic when we had you out. That was great fun.
Oh, cheers.
Like that was kind of a bit of a nerve-wracking experience actually at Kingston because I just moved to Canada again. I met my girlfriend over here, 2015 or whatever, and then had been doing long distance for a while, and I bit the bullet and moved about 8 weeks before that gig, so I wasn't really all that organised because I was trying to figure out my life outside that, and I'd hired that drummer to play with us, but I'd never met him. So he showed up to the gig, and it was like, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're in. Yeah. Just flying by the seat of the pants. So it was nice to have another guitar player to just kind of step in and feed off of. I think it really helped the gigs.
Well, it's great fun for me. I was just happy to play guitar. Like I said, we were in a weird spot at the time and kind of unsure about where things were going to go. So just having the opportunity to have like no strings attached with some guitar. I think Jeff, the sound guy, as well, came up to play bass at one point.
He did, yeah.
We're good buddies with Jeff, and we've worked with him quite a bit since as well. But yeah, I have really only fond memories of that night.
Nah, me too. That was great fun. Yeah, so since then, it's kind of been storm in a teacup because 2018 was quite a good year, and things were starting to heat up. I went full time at the start of 2018, so it was kind of just accelerating into 2019. I had some really good opportunities pop up, so it's kind of ironic, but like I said, I worked in this pub in London that Mickey Moody used to frequent, and I got the opportunity really kindly of them to have me up on stage. It's actually probably about 2 years ago today, really, because it's sort of early January 2019. And then fairly soon after that, got a phone call from an old friend who is a guy called Hal Darkman, who obviously,
yes,
he's a hit songwriter. His father, Randy, is from BTO and Gesto and stuff. And
there's something of musical royalty in Canada.
Yeah, they've done pretty well for themselves.
Yeah,
and very kindly they had me. They had like a kind of like a family gathering, private event, just a few hundred people, and so I got to jam with Randy, which was just fantastic because I've looked up to him since I was kind of yay high.
Yeah,
and and then after that, because of that, probably the calendar for 2019 was just rammed. I did 240 gigs.
Wow.
In 365 days, and lost my voice more than I did when I saw you in Kingston, because I remember I was struggling with my vocal cords there. So that was quite a year, and then pandemic hit in 2020. I was supposed to have a full calendar last year, but as is the case for every musician, March 15th hit and everything shut down. So
Yeah.
yeah. So since then,
note. Sorry.
yeah.
Your for again, for listeners who aren't familiar, your schedule as a full-time musician is insane. I remember seeing you posting your monthly gig schedule, and I was like, this guy never sleeps. It was nuts. So like, you really like, gigging was your lifeblood essentially. So I can, like, we gig a fair amount, but we were never quite that busy, and even we're struggling to like keep momentum going and keep sort of morale up. So I can only imagine how big a shift that must have been for you, going from sort of all to nothing.
Yeah, it's I think the biggest shock for me is growing up. Like, I was in a very musical household, and I've never gone this long without playing with another musician in person before. Because my younger brother, he played with me in bands the whole way through up until the age of 17. From, I want to say we were like 6 or 7 when we first started playing together. So I had that in the house, and then immediately I moved out of my parents' house and sort of stopped living with my brother, moved in with my band, and then so I always kind of lived with musicians. When I moved over here, obviously my girlfriend doesn't play, but I sort of out gigging so much and in it so much that it wasn't like I wasn't around other musicians frequently. And now it's got to the point where it's me and a drum machine in the spare room, it's definitely a different experience. But as a result of this, finally had the time to kind of get some mental space to do my first album, because I never really had the opportunity to kind of have the time to sit down and record in the way that I wanted to before. Everything was kind of rushed. A lot of the stuff that I've recorded before has been like totally live, with a couple of overdub vocals and overdub guitar solos. And it sounds good, but as you all know, having been into a recording studio, it's nice to have time to refine your parts and really put a bit more effort into the production side of things. And so kind of polishing the end of my craft has been quite a formative experience, really, in the same way that gigging has been the last sort of 10 or 11 years. Hopefully this is the start of doing a lot more recording for me. Fingers crossed anyway.
Yeah, that's really cool. So yeah, like you put out an EP. I think when I was just refreshing my memory on Spotify with this earlier. It was 2018, yeah?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I have to say that EP is criminally under-listened to. People listening, go and check it out now. I'm sure you're in a new space now. You're writing new stuff. You probably have a similar mind frame to us towards your older stuff, where you get really excited about the new stuff, and the only thing people have to listen to is stuff that could be many years old by the time they hear it. So but really it's some really, really cool music, and the production on it is your guitar playing is phenomenal. So I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed that EP that you put out a couple years back, and I would encourage people to listen to it to sort of jazz them up for this new stuff.
Well, thank you. That's really kind of you. Yeah, something with that. I literally, when I put that out, I didn't understand Spotify at all, so I dumped it on there like at a day's notice, and now I understand that you need to put that up a month in advance. For any musicians listening, I've been doing a crash course on all this with some friends that have done well on playlists, and it's really important to get those pre-saves and upload a month in advance or whatever, just so that you got into their algorithm, because then you get into that Discover Weekly, and I've got a few friends that have done really well from that. So fingers crossed with the new stuff, because I've put a couple of months of pre-saves into that.
Yeah, it's a different beast, man. Like when we put out our record, we had no idea what we were doing with that either. We were fortunate enough with a couple of the songs to get on some decent playlists, nothing triumphant, but just having sort of a padding of streams on your stuff visually, so when people go and listen to it, there's it's terrible to say, but like a sense of credibility and clout from just looking at the numbers. Weirdly, I think that affects people subconsciously when they're discovering new music. But
Yeah.
it's been a learning process for basically everybody going into this new age where everything is streaming. But certainly this year, when people are doing it more than ever before, and it's pretty much the only thing you can do short of making video content and doing live streams.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a new skill set to learn, but probably something I was overdue to get into, really. Same with recording, because it's not like I hadn't done a lot of it before, but now I've got all of the stuff at home that I can use. It's just makes it way easier to kind of really dig into it, even from an apartment.
With the right software and the right hardware, you can do a lot just straight from home. I've barely scratched the surface. Like in the past, I used to do a lot of home recording. I don't so much now. Just mostly to do with the space that we live in, and I don't have all the software and stuff that I would like to have, because I start to get really nitpicky even with doing demos and things. So but my other guitarist, Thomas, he's a really adept, I don't know if producer is the right word, but like certainly recording engineer in his own right. He has some really good instincts, and when we ever do demos and stuff like that with him, it's a lot of fun. And we're sort of similarly looking towards recording our second album soon, so it's going to be basically all we think about soon.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend. I've got try and pull it out without being too messy here. If you haven't checked these out yet, it's Cataract by Two Notes Torpedo. I'm not being paid to say this or anything, but
okay.
Because I live in the apartment, I've got a couple of amps that are using Kettner and the Fender Princeton behind me. And just speaking as a guitar player, I can record completely silently. It's got like cab stems loaded in. And it's one of those reactive load boxes, so it's way easier for me, at least, because I'm not an engineer, to plug the amp into this rather than trying to figure out where the mic goes, because I'm useless with that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah, those things are really a game changer, especially like you say for recording in an apartment. Just realistically, I love that technology like that is becoming widely available for people.
Yeah, it makes my neighbors like me a lot more.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't play a lot of loud guitar here, but when I do, I have to like section it off to maybe an hour tops, and then I'll get my lad playing in, pray to God that nobody says anything, and then cut it completely and put it away for a week or 2 or 3. I barely play at home electric now, just simply because most of my gear is not here. We keep it at the jam space. But I did want to ask you a little bit about this record that you're making and your songwriting process. So how do you generally approach songwriting?
I think it depends on the song, because some songs, as you know, because you write as well, they sort of come almost out of nowhere. You wake up at like 3 a.m. with catchy kind of hook or a riff or something, or some lyrics. And, I have to say that tends to be, when I'm writing, I tend to have at least one section of the song come to me almost complete with the arrangement and stuff. And that's really, really nice when that happens. When it doesn't happen, sometimes it's just a case of, a bit will come, like just literally a riff or a groove or one lyric line, and then you put it down for 6 months, maybe even a couple of years. And you're going through your notes one day and you look at this thing you wrote sort of 2.5 years ago. I'm speaking from experience here. And then all of a sudden your brain is like, hang on a minute, why didn't I do this, this, and this, Mm-hmm. So I think, creativity is such a weird, unstudied subject, really. We don't really know why it happens or where it comes from. But I think it's really important, though, whatever you're doing with songwriting, or at least for me, just push through, even on the songs that you're not quite sure about. Try and finish them, um, and just see where they lead. Don't confine yourself to genres. So this is kind of the rules that I kind of live by, for me at least. Because with this new album, I've not really stuck to my genre at all. Because I came up doing blues and quite a big soul influence. I love people like Steve Cropper and the old Hendrix records, sort of blues rock. And I found that with doing this new record, perhaps every musician goes through this, but kind of got bored of myself as a musician, and I wanted to push myself to do things that I wouldn't have thought of straight off the bat. So guitar solos being a bit less of a feature, even though they're definitely there. They're more kind of a part of the song, as opposed to being an excuse to show off, like they might have been 6 or 8 years ago when I was a teenager.
I'm getting there as well.
Yeah, and so I think that's really interesting. But then I look back at a lot of the stuff that I grew up listening to, like Queen and Zeppelin, and even those guys that had those kind of wizardry like guitar legends in their groups. It's all about what's going on beneath the solo, really. Like if you've ever listened to Brian May stripped back, it's all about that harmony underneath the solo that makes the lead lines sing. And so it's just been really about learning about layering for me. And another really big influence, ironically, has been the fact that I've been living in an apartment. So a lot of the time, been really forced to not make noise, and that pushes you towards a certain type of music in itself. Like I've been learning to use MIDI libraries, so I taught myself to program drums, and that is really interesting because not all of the tracks have programmed drums on them, but some do, and that's the direction I never saw myself going in. The ones that don't, I've had the chance to write the drum parts in programming and then send them to a drummer, which is a completely new way of working for me because usually I rock up in a room with a song, we record live, and the drummer plays whatever they play. For me as a songwriter, I almost think the bass and the drums are the most important part of the song, part of the lyrics and the melody. And so I think approaching songwriting from a more rhythmic place, and I've rearranged quite a few of my old tracks that I had written and performed with Villanova's originally years ago. Some of those were kind of my tracks that I just kind of brought in one day. And I wasn't quite happy with the arrangements. So I went back through and kind of fine-tooth combed what I was going to change about those and have included them. But yeah, that's basically it. The genre mix is, I've got some influences from 90s alternative kind of Nirvana, Foo Fighters thing going on. Some probably Chris Cornell, I would say, influence in there.
Nice.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've got some influences from hip hop and soul, and there's a lot of soundscaping on some of the tracks. So there's almost a bit of a Hans Zimmer type thing going on. So it's really quite a broad spectrum. I'm quite an eclectic person, so it's kind of reflected in the record, really.
Well, that's exciting, though. I like that's really. I'm finding myself in a similar space when it comes to songwriting. Our record that we put out this year was, one of the songs on that album is like 6 years old, and a number of them peppered in between that time. So we'd been playing them for a long time. Like you say, much of it came from a real guitar-centered framework. And similarly, I find myself thinking a lot more about bass, drums, and rhythm now in writing, almost more than the guitar. If I come across like a catchy guitar hook or something, then I'll pursue it and see what happens. But even the guitar parts are more about the rhythm and the feel than anything else now. That and melody, like you say, those are the most important things to me. And I think it's a really nice way to write with a band. Like I used to write songs almost entirely on my own, bring them to the band with ideas about how things would go, and they'd pepper in their own ideas and make it their own. But for all intents and purposes, it was maybe like 80 to 90% done by the time they hear it. Now it's much different. I could come in with like a fragment of an idea, and they'll just take it and run in a completely different direction than I anticipated. And that's really exciting for me, because you write songs that you didn't even know you had in you.
Yeah. No,
it's a really cool way to do it. And it's interesting though, like the guitar is, I mean, you could make an argument that the guitar is well past its heyday, but similarly, like I heard a statistic that apparently Fender sold more guitars in 2020 than they have in any year in their history. So obviously this thing is going to have a comeback soon.
Yeah.
Not that it ever went away, depending on the music you listen to, because as far as I'm concerned, the guitar is still like a focal point of music that I like to listen to. But I'm really excited to see where it goes from here on out, because the blending of genres and styles that I hear today is so incredibly interesting and, like you say, eclectic. And it excites me as a guitarist just to hear what other people will be doing with that instrument, and also what I might be able to discover moving past, just playing like Stevie Ray Vaughan or something like that, which is fantastic. I mean, that's never going to go away. So it's nice to know that that is solid. That's there. Let's see what else we can do type thing.
Totally, yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine, really interesting guy actually, called Lucas McKinnon, who owns a studio on the island called Silverside Sound. That's where I did Teenagers from Mars, which comes out in a couple days actually. It's January 15th. So that's,
oh really?
At the time of taping this, that's 6 days away. So
it will actually be out by the time this is released. So
yeah,
listen to this.
So go check it out, Teenagers from Mars on Spotify. The link's here. No.
Yeah. Oh, it will be. I'll put it there.
Yeah, no, Lucas, he built this incredible studio, Silverside Sound, up in Cobble Hill, and he and I are quite similar. You and I are quite similar in that I think we've all kind of gone through this musical era dysphoria where we've come up in the age of YouTube and Spotify, and it's possible to listen to anything from anybody in any era. And that's just completely blown the roof off of genres, isn't it? We can wake up in the morning and listen to Jimi Hendrix, and then by the afternoon we're listening to Billie Eilish, and it's all at the button push, And so I think it's interesting because I don't know about you, but I grew up with a mindset that as a teenager, kind of real music had disappeared. And, a lot of that I kind of resent as a mindset now, because I'm so inspired by what I'm seeing in the way that people are using the new technology, to the point where I would say that it's almost like when Hendrix first linked together pedals and created, chain effects loops for guitars in the 60s. He was the first to use fuzz pedal and wah together. We've now got technology that you could sit at home and technically you can write a symphony on an iPad if you want to. Like I'm doing the entire album. My portion of the tracking is all being done off my iPad. This monitor behind me is just powered by the iPad, and then I run it all in through a sort of USB hub for the Lightning inductor, and that's really quite amazing to me. Not that the sounds you're hearing are necessarily from the iPad, but the fact that you can take your recording console anywhere. You could be sat on a plane and be fiddling with the effects, or 3:00 in the morning, you don't want to make noise, you can sit and program something on the iPad that you can then go and replicate with a real instrument. I think the creative possibilities of that are endless, and the use of the guitar within that is really interesting, because to me, good guitar playing is not always what's most obvious, it's what hasn't been thought of. And all the guys I idolize, Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Brian May, Jimmy Page, at some point in their lives were doing something no one had done before. So for me, it's all about that kind of striving to try and do something. I'll never be in any way, anywhere near as good as any of the aforementioned names, but to try and tap into what they were experiencing when they were doing something new. And I think on a songwriting level, if you look at Bowie in 1969 using the mellotron for the first time on Space Odyssey with Rick Wakeman, um, the fact that someone like Billie Eilish can go in with her brother into their spare room and make a record on a MacBook. I think they used like $3,000 worth of gear in total for that entire album, which is won 6 Grammys for them, or whatever. It's crazy. So it opens this whole world for so many people, and we've got so many resources now, like soundbatter.com that Spotify owns, which you can link up with pretty much any mixing engineer. So we're no longer limited to the average bloke around the corner that doesn't really know what he's mixing. You kind of get a high-end mixing engineer and high-end musicians. If you're a solo artist like myself, there's all sorts of options. And it's just really inspiring. I think if there's one positive from this time period, it's the fact that I had the chance to go and explore all that and get excited.
Yeah, totally. I just that was very well said. So have you finished recording this album then, or is it still in the process?
Very much still in the process, but I've kind of got all the pre-production done, so I know what tracks are going to be on it, and it's basically a case of not happy with the guitar tones on the demos, so I'm going to retrack them, and then I'm going to be doing this one a little differently as well because of Spotify. I'm going to do it track by track. So Teenagers from Mars is the first track to come out. The next one will be Bitter Seeds, which is actually a re-release because I did release kind of like a demo version of that about 4 years ago now. But this is completely reworked. It sounds much, much different. Arguably much better, but I don't want to offend anybody. It's interesting when you step back from your songs and you look at them from a production point of view, what you miss when you're in the thick of it, kind of playing the guitar in the room. Really interesting thing I picked up from a producer I worked with last year, a guy called Malcolm Flood, who did Teenagers from Mars with me, is kind of single note phrasing as opposed to full chords. I had been really guilty of just playing the first thing that comes into my head when I write a song. But now looking at things from a production point of view, a lot of modern productions, it's all about single note phrasing, like Arctic Monkeys on AM were really good at that. Mm-hmm. And Black Keys are really good at it. It just helps the recording to be a lot cleaner and kind of bigger and more modern sounding. So I've been kind of experimenting with that. But yeah, so it's going to be about 11 or 12 tracks, give or take. And I'm going to put them out in intervals of about 5 or 6 weeks to give each song kind of time to marinate and do its own thing. And hopefully people like it. I'd love if I could get into some Spotify playlists and maybe get some coverage for it. But if not, I'll just keep banging at the wall till it eventually comes down because that's what it's all about as an independent musician.
Well, I'm sure it will. I'm excited to hear these tracks. It's interesting you have planned it in this way of sort of a drip feed of songs rather than putting them all out at one time. I'm reminded of John Mayer's last full-length album that he put out in sections of 3 or 4. I thought that was really an interesting approach. It was almost like, a series of EPs that came out, that we all knew that it was parts of a full album. But by the time the full thing dropped in its full sequence and everything, I knew and was familiar with all the songs intimately because they all came out in chunks. I had lots of time to familiarize myself with them. And then, it was just a really interesting and creative way of doing it. And I think that's sort of where things are headed in a way. I say this given that we put out our entire album in one go, with the exception of 3 singles. But it's interesting to think about and see how people are approaching it now that streaming is sort of king, and
Yeah,
that having some kind of consistency of content coming out is sort of the way of the future, it seems.
yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because we've kind of gone full circle if you look at history. Because before the '60s and the Beatles, it was all singles, wasn't it? 45 LPs, and albums were kind of something that only the top tier of artists got to do. We're kind of at that point again, really, where if you want to do an album, it's got to be all singles. Otherwise, you're burning money, basically. As I've discovered in the past with my own kind of EP releases and stuff, one track would get a little bit of attention, and then you'd struggle to kind of get the extra mile for the rest of them. So it's just kind of giving every track on the album the sort of single treatment is seemingly to me for this sort of stuff probably really important, especially as some of the stuff is quite experimental, so I don't think it would necessarily get the listenership that I'd like it to if I just kind of stuck it onto an album. But at the same time as being experimental, it's also quite commercial, so it's just kind of giving it a chance to find its niche, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll I mean, we're like right at the beginning of planning our record. I mean, many of the songs are written. We're still writing a handful of them, and basically sort of planning out how and where and when we want to record, and if we want to work with a producer the way we did on the last one and all this. But we haven't even scratched the surface of thinking about how it's going to be released. But I'm sure when the time comes, it'll be a lot more thought put into it than what we did with this last one, because the era of albums, well, I love listening to albums, and
me too. Yeah.
prefers to listen to albums in their entirety. It just, there's something about the nature of how people consume music these days that maybe doesn't make the album the best way to do it anymore necessarily, at least with releasing new music. So yeah, it's really interesting to see what people are doing, and I look forward to seeing how this goes for you as well. I definitely will be listening to them as singles if that's how you're putting them out. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. I'll probably group them together on some kind of maybe put the album as an album on Spotify so people can hear it in the order in which it's intended. But yeah, it's definitely changes up the formula of releasing an album to do it in the kind of modern streaming sense.
Yeah. So where are we now? Yeah. Okay. I want to get into some more fun and kind of standard questions that I've been asking folks.
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Most people don't particularly like this one because it's not very easy to answer, and you'll probably finish the podcast and kick yourself for not mentioning something. But if you had to pick 3 favorite records, say Desert Island records, what would you pick?
That's a really good question. I'm going to have to go with number 1 would be Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
I really, really love Mick Taylor's guitar work on that record, and the use of horns, which I think at that point for the Stones was kind of relatively early into them doing that, but really kind of opened up their sound for me, and that's been a really big influence on what I'm doing at the moment. 2 would either have to be, well, I guess I can't do either. Tough choice.
There's no right or wrong answers.
Okay, all right. 2 is tied. Either Caustic Love by Paolo Nutini, which is a fantastic kind of soul hip-hop crossover record. Just incredible, really underrated, probably the most underrated album of the decade. And tied with that would be Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. Just love that record.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of a hip hop soul crossover. That sounds just great, and obviously he's had a huge influence on rock music. If you listen to AM by Arctic Monkeys, it's clear they're looking backwards to things like that for influence. Three, I would say, is probably got to be in like the opera by Queen, because I loved Queen growing up.
Yeah. I mean, there's the content per square inch of those records you just mentioned is kind of insane. So I get why you'd pick those. There's so much to keep one busy listening to in those records. Like the kind of things that you cannot take in just on a first listen.
No,
there's
for
so
sure.
much to them. Wicked. So and then the other one I was curious to know if recently you've had any new musical discoveries that you'd like to mention. Like what has sort of stuck out to you from either 2020 or 2019?
Yeah, actually, funny you mention that. I've been kind of putting together a playlist on my phone, and I'm just gonna, some of the names I kind of lose in my head sometimes, but there's a guy called Jacob Banks. He did a couple of soundtracks for 50 Shades of Grey a couple of years ago. Just incredible soul singer. He's from London. And a friend of mine recently recommended him. And just can't get enough of his voice. It's just amazing. Marcus King. If you haven't checked him out already, I think Marcus King is going to be like the next Eric Clapton or Hendrix or whatever. He's mixed with like an Otis Redding kind of thing. He's just got the best voice I probably have ever heard, mixed with just incredible guitar skills. And he's 2 years younger than me, so that makes me jealous.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Let's see what else is on here. Tom Odell. He's been around for a little while now, but he actually went to the same university as I did a few years before me, and we had some of the same teachers, but I don't know him personally. But it's just incredible songwriter. I think like Elton John, Leon Russell type. He's kind of got that kind of rough and ready character, Leon Russell type voice that takes a minute to get used to, but much like kind of a David Bowie type thing. Once you love the voice, you're kind of hooked.
Yeah.
And the songwriting on his albums is amazing. And Wildcard, I actually really like the new Harry Styles stuff, and that probably sounds unusual coming from someone like me, but
hey, Harry Styles has my full respect. I've
been so amazed that someone such as himself has come out of a kind of boy band pop type sphere, and then is actually making, contrary to what I was just saying about releasing singles, he's making albums, and if you sit down and listen to the albums, they're really good.
Yeah, it really excites me when I discover that somebody who I'd either kind of written off as a particular thing turns out to be much more than that. And I sometimes I kind of kick myself thinking, why did this pass me by? In the case of Harry Styles, I'm not that bothered because it was One Direction. It's not like there was obvious genius lurking there that I was missing. It just wasn't my thing.
That's. But I'm in the same boat. If someone had told me 11 years ago that would be one of my favorite records of the last sort of 2 or 3 years, I would have probably laughed at them. But
yeah, but no, he's doing some amazingly cool stuff. I don't know if you've heard his cover of Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel.
Yeah,
as soon as I saw that, I was like, man, respect that he really slayed that track.
Yeah, and the final one I want to mention is Declan McKenna. If you haven't checked him out, I think that guy's going to be like the next David Bowie. He's just so creative, and he's really young as well. Like, again, he's a couple of years younger than me. It's just like, particularly his new album Zeros. Been listening to that a lot lately, and it's just incredible. Like, it's like a mix of like hunky dory with kind of a modern indie backdrop. And he's got a great guitar player, Isabel Torres, on that record, who has done some fantastic work. And just the production is just amazing. It's worth checking out if you haven't listened to it already.
That's like an exciting combination. I'll have to. That's the best thing about me doing these podcasts is I keep learning about all the music I should be listening to that I have not discovered yet. Yeah,
no, for sure.
So I've got a couple rapid fire questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So some of these I feel I can probably predict, and that's usually the case with a number of the people I'm interviewing. But I like to find out anyway. Beatles or Stones?
Narrowly, Beatles.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair.
narrowly.
It's got to be a narrow decision, really, as far as I'm concerned. All right, road or studio?
Which?
Road or studio?
Oh, road.
Yeah, same.
Because you can take an iPad and still record stuff. So.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, they could be one and the same these days.
Yeah.
Singles.
Albums for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems a fair one. Everybody has said albums so far, but I asked the question because I'm curious to find somebody who does prefer standalone songs. I'm sure they exist, and I would love to hear their reasoning for that, because I can totally imagine a great argument for that. All right, lyrics or music first when you're writing?
Tends to be lyrics, and then I stick them on a side burner, and then I write a song that's completely unrelated, and two go together. So.
Okay, kind of like half and half in a way.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I've done that before. My approach is kind of random, like you say. It's definitely not formulaic, but I really do tend to write music, like almost an entire song music wise, before I start attacking it with lyrics, because lyric writing kind of intimidates me a little bit, because I'll fall in love with what I'm writing musically, and then I'll be like, oh god, I have to put words on this now, and if this doesn't like match the feeling of the song or something, then I'm just going to ruin the whole thing. So I find it somewhat intimidating, and sometimes it's the complete opposite. I'll have an idea for a lyrical hook that just works, and those kinds of songs write themselves, but it's very rare I find that happens. That's cool though. Some people have said it's entirely the opposite way, so I find that really intriguing to find out, especially when it's music from people that I really love, and you find out that the approach is entirely contrary to the way I would have done it or something.
Yeah, no, sure.
And then last one, what should everybody be listening to in this day and age?
I'm going to have to say that Declan McKenna record, Zeros. Yeah. Stand out. Probably the best of the decade, I would say.
That will be the first thing I put on when we finish this conversation.
Definitely.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but Brett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we can do this again sometime further down the line when more of the tracks are out.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and when touring is a thing again as well.
Fingers crossed.
We'd love to come out west and play some gigs with you, and vice versa.
Absolutely. We'll have to share a stage again sometime soon.
Yeah, wicked. All right, well, all the best. And
you too.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us on Vinyl Safari. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow Vinyl Safari on whichever podcast platform you're using. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to Oakridge Ave to catch the latest episodes, new music, and more. We greatly appreciate your support. You can also follow Brett online at brettsmithdaniels.com, at Brett Smith Daniels on Facebook, and at Brett Smith Daniels on Instagram. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next Vinyl Safari.